Good afternoon. My name is Josh Palmer. I'm head of content and research for Onboard. We're very happy for you to join us today. Looking forward to a great session with Seamus McGillen. Seamus Gillen. My apologies, Seamus. We'll give the room a few minutes so folks can filter in here until we get a nice quorum, so to speak.
So, Josh, you're in the US.
Yes, I am US based. It's quite early in the morning, not too early. Yeah, I'm just outside of Chicago in the US. If you're famous or if you're familiar with the geography there. Yeah, Seamus, today we're talking about how behavioral patterns shape decision-making performance in the boardroom. So if that's the webinar you signed up for, we're very glad you're here. We'll get started in just a few minutes here.
Cool. And let me know when you want me to put the slides up.
Yeah, I think we should go ahead in the next 15 seconds when you're ready, Seamus.
Okay, cool. Right.
All right.
See that okay? And
yeah, looks great for mine at least. We'll get started with a couple housekeeping items here. Just a few notes just as we get started. This is a Zoom webinar presentation, so all guests are muted by default. We do, however, encourage you to share your comments, your feedback, your questions, either via the Q&A, the Zoom Q&A feature, where you can submit questions either to the panelists or to the audience as a whole, or the chat feature. We do really hope that you do interact with your fellow audience members, and we will be curating and consolidating questions throughout the presentation to be answered during the live QA during the chat. One other note, we do send both the on-demand recording of this webinar to every registrant, usually as well as the slide deck. So if you missed anything during the presentation or if you weren't even able to make the show, we do send those materials on in a follow-up email, usually about 24 hours after the show is concluded. And then we do have one ask of our audience today. If you could rate the webinar, it takes less than 30 seconds. It does help us, that feedback does help us optimize our webinar performance and just make sure that we're presenting great topics for you, our webinar attendees. So a little bit about me. I'm Josh Palmer, head of content. I've been with the company for about 3 years. And then Seamus Gillen is an author, governance advisor, director, and trainer who's run Value Alpha for more than 17 years. He's passionate about governance as a business enabler and as an essential underpin for effective value creation. Seamus works with boards, directors, board secretaries over the world, focusing on board and director effectiveness. He's particularly proud of his work writing the UK Financial Reporting Council's guidance on board effectiveness, the most refreshing and straightforward piece of code guidance globally on building better boards. And then if you're unfamiliar, a little bit about Onboard. What we do, we are a software maker, and our goal is to inspire and enable organizations, and especially board-led organizations, to do their best work in a digital world. We currently serve more than 5,000 board-led organizations across 50 plus countries. We have more than 100,000 users, and we host more than 55,000 board meetings annually. If you'd like to get in touch with us, if you don't already have our contact information, you can find us at onboardmeetings.com. LinkedIn, we're at Onboard Meetings, and then on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Onboard Meetings as well. And with that, a quick introduction on Seamus's book, Building Better Boards. This book focuses on governance as a live issue. It's as an ongoing priority for an area of board focus with developments occurring around the world, literally on a daily basis. So with that introduction, I'm very proud to introduce Seamus, and Seamus, take it away. Thank you.
Josh, thank you very much. It's great to be here. Thank you for the invitation. And hello, good afternoon, I think probably to most people, although there may be some other time zones on the call. So I'm doing this from Durham in the north of England this afternoon, which is a very beautiful city. So if you get the chance to visit Durham, I very much promote the city. It's got a beautiful cathedral and university and so on. So that's where I'm broadcasting from this morning. And Josh, you're 5 hours earlier than us. So Thank you very much for getting up early. So I'm going to take the slides down in a second, and a couple of things I'll say before I do so. First of all, I'm very grateful for my collaboration with Onboard. Onboard are very supportive of the work that I do on governance, and I'm therefore very supportive of the work that Onboard does in terms of its product. And I do know that there are providers out there, and equally that there are people who are looking around for different providers who can give them a more maybe customer focused solution than what they are receiving at the moment. So I don't have any difficulty in promoting Onboard to everybody and asking you to take advantage of the opportunity to contact Josh or to contact anyone else in the Onboard community who if you want to explore a different provider. And I do know that Onboard were at the Chartered Governance Institute conference in Ireland last week and got a lot of very favourable feedback, and will be appearing at the Chartered Governance Institute conference in July, early July. So if any of you are going to that conference, maybe you can seek Onboard out and have a chat with them. The other thing I wanted to say was just to repeat Josh's entreaty to you to get involved in this webinar. The more questions you ask, the more interesting this all becomes, and it's through your questions and challenge that we'll be able to take the thinking forward in terms of this session. And we are going to follow up with with a longer session, a masterclass in July. We'll give you the details at the end. And so this is really whetting the appetite in terms of the initial thinking about behaviours in the boardroom, which is a very important issue. So this is a starter, and then hopefully you'll be able to join for the masterclass, for which we'll provide the details at the end of the call. What we were going to do was to start with some polls. So I'm going to stop sharing for a moment so that we can actually see the polls properly. So there's 3 polls that I'm going to put to you. And then, as Josh mentioned at the end, it would be good if you would answer the poll on how you found the webinar itself, because that will help Onboard tailor their approach to reaching out and educating and making the world a better place in terms of understanding of governance and the practice of governance. So I'm going to we're going to have 3 polls now, which are going to lead us into the conversation. So this is always a good way for people to start getting involved. So if we can put the first poll question up, please. So what, in your view, for those of you who are on the call, is the main purpose of a board meeting? Is it for the directors to grow their professional network, get to go around the world for nothing, have a good lunch, or take high quality strategic decisions? So I think it might be a little bit obvious. I'm not expecting 25% for each answer. I'm expecting, I've got a clear favourite in view on the answer to that one. So if you could just, okay, so, well, look at that, 100%. I'm very disappointed that nobody went for the free lunch or the good lunch or traveling around the world for not a lot of money. Actually, it is interesting that there are some directors still out there who see service on the board as more something that's going to work for them than for the entity on which they serve. But yeah, the main purpose of a board is, of course, to take high quality strategic decisions. And if I say to you that when I'm working with boards, and I do work with boards literally all around the world, and I ask the directors, what do you think your purpose is? Or if I ask at the end of a meeting, do you think that was a good meeting? And they say, well, how would I know? And I say, well, you will know whether it was a good meeting by assessing your performance against the reason you're sitting on that board. So why were you sitting on that board? What were you there to achieve? And it's really quite remarkable that it can take me an hour or so to work with some boards of directors to help them understand that their main purpose in sitting on that board is to take the organization forward by taking decisions. And it's how we move forward at a personal level in our own lives, and how organizations move forward professionally in their lives is by taking decisions. So if a board is not taking decisions, then they're wasting their time. And we're also talking about high quality decisions and strategic decisions. And some other time we can explore those concepts a bit more deeply. In fact, we can explore those concepts in the masterclass in 2 weeks' time. So the main purpose of a board is to take high quality strategic decisions. So if we could have the second poll question now, please. So this is a multiple choice. I'd ask you to limit your answers to 2. In your view, I mean, these are all important, but in your view, what are the 2 biggest drivers of the ability of a board to take high quality strategic decisions? Is it discussing the areas which create long-term value for the organization? Is it having board members around the table who are able to discuss those issues based on their skills, their knowledge, and so on? Is it the ability of the board members to work well together, displaying appropriate behaviours, which is what we're going to be discussing in this session now? Or is there a strong governance process in place to allow the board to operate effectively? That's things like the quality of the board pack, whether the board members have got out and about to understand the organisation better, whether they've read the papers before they turn up for the meeting. That's all in that final question, which is about board hygiene, board process. So we'll give you a little bit longer to answer this question. So what, in your personal experience, there's no right answer or wrong answer, what would you say are the 2 most important drivers of the ability of the board to take high quality strategic decisions? So, right, so we've got the answers coming up now. Okay, so this is interesting. As I say, there are no right answers or wrong answers. So the clear leader, and bearing in mind that everybody has had the chance to cast 2 votes, the clear leader is having the right people around the table, the people with the skills, the knowledge, the experience, the diversity of cognitive thought, cognitive thinking. So that is what you have identified as the most important driver. And I think I probably agree, actually. Well, let's come back to that. Let's not put the poll results down yet, because there's quite a lot to talk about in these results. So the second one is having discussions about the issues which create long-term value for the organization. Okay, I want to come back to that in a second. Third is having good board process in place, and would sometimes call that hygiene, but just because we use the term hygiene doesn't mean at all that that's low value. It's governance hygiene is massively important, and it's like in our own personal lives or in the lives of animal welfare or whatever, hygiene is really important. And if you don't have that hygiene, then the body can become sick and the body can become ill. So hygiene is really important. And then the one which has come last is with 36% of the vote, albeit 2 votes each, is the ability of board members to work well together and to display appropriate behaviours. Now, I'm just thinking out loud down there in the background. Maybe we could let's keep the poll results up for the moment, but I wonder if we could relaunch that poll at the end, if we could just capture the percentages there, which is 55% for the first one, 73%, 36%, and 45%. Let's see if we can, Dan, if you're able to do it towards the end of the webinar, we can relaunch that poll and see whether people have voted differently, because we're actually going to be speaking to that third point about behaviours, which in this particular poll has scored the lowest rating. So let's keep these poll results up for the moment. So actually, the 4 drivers for high quality strategic decision making are all of these 4. And if you look at the boards with which you are familiar, that you service, that you sit on, or whatever, the ways in which a board can assess its effectiveness is the degree to which it's discussing the right issues, and lots of boards actually spend their time occasionally discussing the wrong issues, or issues which are not important, or issues which are not as important as other issues that they should be discussing. Secondly, they have around the table people who are not up to that discussion. They do not have the skills, the knowledge, the attributes, the behaviours, the independence, the whatever that allows them to contribute knowledgeably to the conversation. So you could be discussing the right issues, but you don't have sitting around the table the right people to discuss those issues. Or it can work the other way around. You can have a really good board with the right people with the right skills and knowledge and attributes generally, but the board is wasting its time discussing issues to which they cannot apply that knowledge because they're the wrong issues. So the third point is something that we discovered after the global financial crisis in 2007, 2008. 2007 was the year of subprime in the US, which is when we discovered that the financial world, particularly in the West and particularly in the US, was investing in subprime property. And that led on then to the global meltdown in 2008. So the global financial crisis was in 2007, 2008. The contagion started in the US 2007 with subprime, and then continued to the global financial system in 2008. And it was during that crisis that David Walker, who was the chair of Barclays, was asked to look at what had gone wrong with the global banking system, but particularly the banks in the UK, which had collapsed. And most of the banks which collapsed were in the US and in the UK. It was a Western problem, a Western issue. And so David Walker said that a major problem was with the behaviours inside the boardroom. And so we have Sir David Walker and the Walker Report, which was published the year after, 2009, to thank for the fact that we began to look at behaviours inside the boardroom. And before that, we had not looked at behaviours inside the boardroom. And that's what we're going to be looking at now in this conversation. And behaviours also begets culture, and culture begets behaviours. It's either a virtuous circle or a vicious circle. If the behaviours and culture are good, they feed off each other and things get better. And if they're weak, they destroy each other and things get worse. So behaviours and culture are critically important in terms of the quality of decision making inside the room. So as I say, we'll revisit this poll maybe at the end of the webinar to see if people's views have changed about the importance of behaviours in terms of decision making. And then finally, the final point is the importance of board process, the quality of the board pack, the preparedness of the directors before the meeting begins, the quality of the meeting itself, and finally, the investment by the entity in the director cadre in terms of induction, in terms of ongoing CPD opportunities, coaching and mentoring, and so on. And I'm going through this quite quickly. If you want to understand better, please get a copy of the book. It's all written in the book in terms of how do we take good decisions in the boardroom. So let's close that poll down now. So thank you very much, Dan. And let's go on to the third poll, please. So the third poll is, what is needed for a board meeting to be effective? If we're talking about the effectiveness of the ability of the board to take high quality decision making, then what makes for that board being effective at that? Is it lots of cakes and pastries? Is it actually avoiding decision making altogether? Because decision making is hard, and if ever you've been involved in a board meeting, you'll know decision making is hard. So some boards aren't great at taking decisions. What makes an effective meeting? Is it the ability of the directors to get Wi-Fi so they can continue with the rest of their work whilst they're sitting in the board meeting? Or is it a psychological safe space? Which factor there do you think is probably going to be the most important factor in terms of allowing a board meeting to be effective? So if you could just vote for one of those. Yeah, so that wasn't a difficult decision to make because, of course, cakes and pastries might be nice, but they're not going to make the board meeting effective, and so on. But I did put in there some other behavioural traits of boards, like directors not spending time focusing on the business, but actually doing their own emails, and that happens. I work with boards, directors taking phone calls, leaving the meeting, just not taking decisions. That doesn't mean that decision isn't put to them, but they're not ready to take it, so they defer it to another meeting, and so on and so on. So there can be a lot of dysfunction inside the boardroom, but the clue that is that we're now going to go on and talk about the psychological safe space, which is absolutely fundamental for board to be able to operate effectively. So I'm going to put the slides up now, but whilst I'm putting the slides up, it would be really good if anybody wanted to ask a question or put a comment in the chat box or whatever, any thoughts that any of you might have had as a result of those poll questions. If there's anything that you want to type up and put into the conversation, then you're very welcome to, because that will be able to allow us to develop the conversation. So feel free at any time to put something into the chat box or the Q&A. Thank you. And Josh will look out for that for me. So the point about today's webinar, and then we'll discuss this in more detail at the masterclass, is that I believe, and you're very welcome to disagree with me or to put an alternative view to me, that the effectiveness of any board meeting, or indeed any committee meeting or any team meeting, is dependent upon the existence of a psychological safe space inside the room. And we'll be talking about behaviours a little bit on this call and more in the masterclass session, but proper behaviours cannot be exhibited inside a boardroom unless a psychological safe space exists. Very, very quickly, if you could just type in the chat box or the Q&A box, at the risk of half going into one, half going into the other, let's say into the chat box. If you could very, very quickly just type into the chat box, who is responsible for creating the psychological safe space inside the boardroom? Just very, very quickly, just type that in, please. Who do you think is responsible for creating the psychological safe space? So I think hopefully everyone's got. So, okay, so some really, really good answers there. So, I mean, so let's start with the most obvious answer. It's the chair. It's the chair's role, because who runs the board? It's the chair who runs the board. So it's the chair's responsibility to create the psychological safe space. But so anyone who says chair, go to the top of the class, that's all of you. But I really like some of the glosses on some of the answers. So, for example, Renee has said all the members, Joy has said all the board members. Suzanne has said everyone. So I think a nice gloss on that is that the board doesn't belong to the chair. The board belongs to the board. The board belongs to all the board members. So it's a really important point to make, which is that even if the chair is there to take the lead in creating that psychological safe space, he or she can't do it on their own without all the other board members understanding what the chair is trying to do and being supportive of and party to the role of the chair and the attempts by the chair to create a psychological safe space. So that is that's an even better answer than the chair. I did ask who's responsible, so the chair is the right answer. But in a way, everybody is responsible. So now, who mentioned COSEC? So Silvana, hi Silvana, nice to see you on the call. So that's really interesting. It'd be interesting to have people's views on whether we think the COSEC has a role to play in creating a psychological safe space. I think that's a very valid point. And maybe the gloss on that is that in meeting, it's the chair's role, but outside of the meeting, as the person who is supporting board process, that is maybe where the COSEC has to be particularly involved in just checking what's going on in board meetings and whether that psychological safe space exists. So that's interesting. And who mentioned chief exec? So Susan, you said the chair and the chief exec. I'd be very interested in people's views on that as well. Because what we know is that the chair runs the board and the chief exec or the CEO or whatever runs the organization. And the most important relationship inside any organization is between the person who runs the board and the person who runs the organization, between the chair and the CEO. So it is a very valid point to say that the CEO also has a role, because the CEO may or may not be there on their own. They may have other members of the executive team present in the room. And we would expect the CEO also to be giving signals to other members of the executive team, as well as members of the team who are not members of the board, but are coming into the board meeting to present and so on, that this is a psychological safe space. So Cheryl, you're saying the COSEC can have a role in creating this space as a person who has the ears of the chair, and the COSEC may be able to highlight some areas of concern the chair may not see. And I think that's absolutely right, that the chair will be doing, you're looking for the chair to have a lot of empathy and knowledge of people and body language and all of that stuff, but they are going to be busy running the meeting. And so we're also looking for at least one or two other people to be keeping an eye out for what's happening in the room. And one of those people, if they're good, may also be the CEO, the chief exec. But we would definitely be looking for the COSEC to be playing a role, just seeing what's going on. And I just want to pick up on Chris's point. All four factors are important and mutually dependent. Take away one and high performance is likely to be impacted. So that's my point really, Chris. So thank you for making that point, that an effective board is dependent upon all four of these factors. And today we just are happening to concentrate and focus on behaviours. But take any one of those away and we're going to have an issue. So thanks very much for that interaction. And if anybody wants to comment on, put any further comments on the role of the chief exec CEO in the board in terms of helping support the chair's job in creating the psychological safe space, or the role of the COSEC, the secretary in doing that, then feel free just to put something into the chat box and we'll catch up on it. So why behaviours matter is that the principal purpose of the board is to take high quality strategic decisions, which create value for the benefit of the organization's stakeholders. So that means having people around the table and able to make that happen. Those people around the table, the NEDs, are people who are bringing into the room their understanding and knowledge of what is going on in the wider world. That's the gift that they bring. And if they're not in the room, they don't bring that gift. So boards that don't have independent non-executive directors are losing out big time because they do not have in the room people who are bringing a deeper, wider understanding of what's going on in the outside world. But their gift is then to apply that to what is going on inside the organization. So what we get is dysfunction in the room, in the boardroom, when you have independent non-executive directors who are present, but they are applying their knowledge of what's changing in the outside world without knowing what is changing inside the organization. So that's a plea for independent non-executive directors to spend more time getting to know the business model, spending more time getting to understand the business. And then what we're looking is for all of those people to come together to bring those different perspectives into play, to have the appropriate behaviours in place inside the room so that those discussions can take place in a proper way. That leads then to a good conversation and then good judgments. And if in theory, if that continuum exists, the right people discussing the right issues, with knowledge of both the way the outside world is changing, the way the inside world is changing inside the organization, with the correct behaviors in place, that will then lead to a high quality conversation, that leads to high quality judgments, high quality decisions, and in theory, high quality outcomes. And it's then the role of the chair to triangulate the views expressed and bring the conversation to a close with the decisions. And if that continuum isn't in place, then we're not going to get good decisions. And the role of the board is to take high quality strategic decisions. So we can see that behaviours is part of that continuum. And if that continuum is broken, then the board will not take high quality decisions. So behaviours are an essential underpin for that good quality, high quality strategic decision making to take place. Just going back to Susan's comment in the chat, if the CEO is not responsive to feedback and is defensive and combative, this is not conducive to creating a psychologically safe space. I think that's absolutely right. It's a really good point. So one of the critical behaviors that we'll talk about at the masterclass is about constructive creative challenge. Well, it's of each other, of course, but the main challenge that takes place inside the boardroom is by the non-execs in relation to the executive. And if the executive is not able to be anything other than defensive, then one is already beginning to chip away at and dilute and erode that psychological safe space that exists inside the room. So that's a really important point. And so that thing about the dynamic between the non-execs and the executive team, if that's not working, then that psychological safe space is not going to be present, or it's not going to be as effective as it could possibly be. And I'm going to show you definitions now of the psychological safe space and what it's all about, and whether you feel that you've got it in your boardroom, the boards where you're working, and so on. But that's a very helpful point. And if anyone else wants to extend that, develop that thought, then that's great. I mean, I would say also that for any board member to be defensive is unhelpful. For any board member to disagree with the executive in a defensive way, for any board member, non-exec, to disagree with another non-exec in a negative way is, again, unhelpful. So, but you're right to point out that the chief executive, the CEO's attitude to being questioned is really important. So we talked about what are those drivers for high quality decision making. That's what we did the poll on. And what we might be looking for inside the board is this model can be developed. It's in the book, but we're talking about directors having a knowledge of the sector so that they can contribute meaningfully to the business discussion, being independent of the entity, and that includes the executive directors as well, putting the entity first in terms of developing the business, not putting themselves first in any way or defending their silos or whatever. And then boardcraft. Do directors know how to behave inside the boardroom? And boardcraft is as much about behaviours as it is about anything else. And I've worked with a number of boards where the need to improve the quality of board behaviours is paramount. And I've worked with boards where management teams get very defensive, and I've seen significant bust-ups in boardrooms where the management team just basically throws the toys out of the pram because of that inability to take challenge. So the ideal combination of what we'd expect to see inside the boardroom might be based on this kind of model as a starter. So what is psychological safety? And guys, continue to give me your thoughts, and Josh, your thoughts in the chat or Q&A. So psychological safety is the belief that no one will effectively be humiliated or punished for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or making mistakes. So it's a shared expectation held by members of a team. And I'm going to talk about the board as team in this call, but a shared expectation that they can take interpersonal risks without being shamed by other team members. And it's an environment that encourages, recognizes, and rewards individuals for their contributions and ideas. So I've just said that I don't want it to be too much of a throwaway line, but we're starting this conversation that will continue with the masterclass as the board as a team before we talk about the board as an entity with fiduciary duties. And I believe that we spend too much time on boards as entities with fiduciary duties to the exclusion of understanding boards as teams. And in the masterclass, we look at the work of two dominant models of boards as teams, one by Tuckman, an American, from 40 years ago, on forming, storming, norming, and performing, and then the Lencioni model of teamwork. So we'll look at those in the masterclass in 2 weeks' time. But we should see boards as teams. So these slides refer to boards as teams as well as operational teams as teams. So actually, I was responsible for saying some time ago that Amy Edmondson was the person who really created the concept. She wasn't. I was wrong. It's been in existence way before Amy Edmondson talked about it in 1999 from Harvard, but she was the person really who popularized the concept. And what she said was that a team success will largely boil down to its tacit beliefs about interpersonal interaction and a shared belief that the room is a safe space for interpersonal risk-taking. So Chris, you're just saying, in your experience, the chair and CEO invariably discuss issues prior to the meeting to ensure alignment and avoid open disagreement, where the CEO's view ignored or overruled. This could be due to the predominant jurisdictional culture. Yeah, so there's always a lot of team management and stage management goes on before a meeting, and correctly so. That can also sometimes get in the way of risk-taking inside a room, and it can sometimes close down conversations. So it'd be very interesting if people felt able to comment on that point which you just made about stage management before a meeting. Is stage management before a meeting helpful or unhelpful, and could it get in the way of psychological safety? So this is the actual model that Amy Edmondson proposed in her kind of breakthrough popularization of the importance of psychological safe space, but we don't need to go into that too much. So why does it matter? It's a generally held view now that psychological safety is the basis for high-performing teamwork. and think of boards as teams, please. That if psychological safety doesn't exist inside the room, then the chances of the board as a team performing effectively are reduced. And I'd like you to put into the Q&A or the chat any examples you've got of where you've seen unsafe behaviour. I mean, we're working on the basis of Chatham House, and please don't name any organisation anyway, but it would be useful if you could give examples of how you've seen unsafe behaviour and an unsafe meeting as a result of the absence of psychological safety. So when people on a team possess that sense of safety, they feel they can challenge ways of working and the ideas of others on the team, including the ideas of those in authority. So just because the chair says something doesn't mean that another person can't disagree with it. Just because the CEO says something doesn't mean that a member of the executive team can't express a different view. And the best boards I've seen is where different members of the management team are in the room expressing different views. They don't feel they have to follow the line of the chief executive. Through that honesty and openness, risks are reduced, new ideas are generated, team is able to execute on those ideas, and everyone feels included. And that's the theory. John, you believe there are limits to a board being a team. But you understand the view. Well, I agree as well. I mean, I agree with that. I simply think we start with the board as a team, and then we move on to the board as an entity and protecting fiduciary duty. Suzanne, you're saying you've observed a chair and CEO texting each other during a meeting, very, very obviously about other members of the team. Yeah, absolutely guaranteed to destroy trust in the room. Trust is an important behavioural attribute that we'll discuss in the masterclass in 2 weeks' time. So, and I was talking to somebody yesterday about a conflict of interest where the chair had appointed the CEO in an organisation who was going to be reporting to the board on a regular basis without following the process of nomination and appointment. The chair is having a relationship with the COO, and that is destroying trust in the room. So those are the kind of issues that we do have to think about quite seriously in terms of trust. So the return on investment on psychological safety is that it's like oxygen. You notice when it's not in the room. And in fact, it's the only thing you care about when it's not in the room. But if it's in the room, then we can begin to develop the trust that allows the meeting to continue in a safe way. So leaders need to take extra steps to be aware of individuals' perceptions of the psychological safety they're experiencing. And that is why checking in and checking out is a really important concept in terms of board craft. And again, it's the responsibility of the chair to check in and check out. But I have actually seen board meetings where other board members have said, do you mind, Chair, if we just stop for a moment? Can we just check into the mood in the meeting? Because the mood has gone down, people have quietened, the mood has got deflated. And so that idea of checking in and checking out and finding out where people are in the meeting, it can be really important. And that's a real gift to the chair to be able to do that. And it's not psychological safety if people can only voice what people want to hear. The goal is not to be comfortable, it's to create a climate where people can speak up without fear. Psychological safety begins with admitting our own mistakes and welcoming challenge from others. So psychological safety, creating a virtuous circle where people are comfortable admitting their fallibilities and their mistakes and learning from that failure, and openly sharing ideas from experiments and cultivating innovation in the room, and avoiding falling prey to analysis paralysis is how one person, and Laura LeCunff recaps Amy Edmondson's original work. So Sally, whilst I agree that executives should feel able to have a contrary view to the CEO, some matters that the executive team should come to a consensus on before the meeting. I agree. So it's a case of finding the balance between the executive team putting a clear, compelling case to the board, and at other times allowing a discussion to go on inside the boardroom where the thinking can develop to take issues to the next level, to take the thinking to the next level. And Susan, I do think the concept of cabinet decision making is very important, and that whilst robust discussion should take place, at the end of the day, once a decision is taken, then everyone needs to accept it. Well, that's absolutely the case, and that is joint and several liability, unanimity inside the boardroom. Everybody agrees and moves forward and takes the organization forward on the basis of the decisions taken. There's no psychological safe space. Doesn't mean that after the decision is taken, that directors should feel free to disagree with the decision and take that disagreement outside the boardroom. Once a decision is taken, based on a proper discussion where psychological safety exists, then everybody has to sign up to that decision and in order to take the organization forward. And if directors aren't happy with that, then they need to leave that board. They need to move on and go to a board where they are happy with what's been decided. So what are the benefits? Maybe this is a bit more team focused rather than board focused, but this is what the work on, and many people have worked on psychological safety since the work of Amy Edmondson, that fewer mistakes, smaller impact of mistakes, more ideas, more freedom to explore and improve ideas, faster delivery and time to market. And again, it would be useful if any of you can put in the chat box examples of where you've seen psychological safety leading to faster decision makings, more harmonious decision making, more consensual decision making. So not just the downsides, but also the upsides, and whether you can talk about where you've seen chairs really create that safe space, and equally where you've seen chairs or other members destroy that safe space. So yeah, we've got an hour goes quickly. We've just got just over 10 minutes to talk. So please just come forward with your ideas about psychological safety. And also burnout is a big concept, increasingly these days, increased diversity and inclusion. And there we're talking about not just demographic diversity, which is women and people of race and disability and so on, but we're talking about cognitive diversity, which is what we're really after inside the boardroom, people who think differently. We all make mistakes. Directors make mistakes. Directors are not infallible. And if you create a climate where people can be wrong and they're prepared to learn from their mistakes, and that is very helpful. Greater sharing of learning and carrying out experiments and risk intelligent failures. So the idea of fast failure is a great concept, which is very strong in the US, which is if it takes 100 attempts to get the right answer, then fail quickly. You know, to get to that 100th solution, 100th answer, which is the solution, fail quickly on the other 99. So intelligent failure and fast failure is facilitated by a psychological safe space. Again, low employee turnover is, okay, that's relevant to teams, but it can also be relevant to a board. If somebody's not happy serving on a board, they'll leave it. And if there is inside the boardroom bullying, misogyny, racism, sexism, whatever, people being closed down, directors will leave the board. And if it's a board which is functioning well, people will be more willing to join that board, and there'll be greater resilience. Now, looking at this diagram, this is a very helpful diagram for, we can bring the board into this, which is bottom left, where performance is low and psychological safety is low. You will see apathy in the room. People are not committed to the growth of the organization. They'll show up, but their hearts and minds are elsewhere. And I have seen boards where directors' hearts and minds have been elsewhere. But if you've got a lot of psychological safety, but the performance is still low, then that's a comfort zone. And people are open and collegiate, but they are not challenged. And again, I have seen boards in comfort zones where it's a safe space to talk. There's a great sense of teamwork and so on, but it's not challenging. The conversation is not challenging. And I'm going to be controversial here and say that I think that is more likely to happen in some kind of high focused, not-for-profit environments where there's a very high level of teamwork, but where the quality of the conversation may not be rigorous enough. Bottom right-hand corner, psychological safety levels are low, but performance is high. That means that people will not try new ideas or try new things or ask for help because the space doesn't exist for new thinking. So the performance might be high within the board, but people will not come forward with new ideas. They'll be afraid to say, can I introduce some left field thinking, for want of a better term? Can I think outside the box in terms of could we do this, could we do that? So that will create a situation of anxiety. And the place to be is the learning zone, the top right-hand corner, where levels of psychological safety are high and performance standards are high. And as a result, there's learning goes on inside the room. And learning and development is something which applies to directors as much as it applies to anybody else. The idea that directors have nothing to learn is a complete fallacy, and boards should be learning environments where the non-executives are learning about what's really going on inside the organization, and the executive team have brought to them learning perspectives that they would not be capable of generating on their own. So they learn in the service of high performance, getting complex and innovative thinking done. And so this is a schematic or a diagram which very much emphasizes the learning zone, and I'd be interested to hear people's views on whether you think boards should be learning zones, or whether you don't think this is relevant to a board. Do you think that all decision making should be stage managed and orchestrated inside a boardroom, a board meeting, or do you think that there should be scope for creating innovative thinking that actually brings the conversation to the next level? So Chris saying, could you please say a bit about the role and importance of NEDs versus non-NEDs? Chris, do you mean independent non-executive directors versus non-independent? So Josh, you've got a view on this. Do you have a view, Josh?
No, actually, I don't say, Seamus. Our experience here in the US is we don't have as much distinction between non-executive directors and executive directors. So apologies there.
No, that's all right. And I think that's a very important point, that in the US, the culture is very much one of supporting the CEO. Whereas in the UK and elsewhere in the West, the culture is more one of challenging the CEO. So we've got amazing case studies that come out of the US, where and these are case studies of failure, which is not to say that failure only happens in the US, happens everywhere, including the UK. But two particular case studies I can think of is Boeing and the 737 MAX crashes, and Theranos, the blood testing technology, which the company was worth $9 billion when it collapsed. where the board were very supportive and non-challenging of the CEO and the management team, and didn't ask the kind of questions which would have, maybe in the case of Theranos, revealed that there was effectively a complete fraud going on around the blood testing technology. And in the case of Boeing, the board simply not challenging the CEO about the two crashes that killed over 500 people in the two plane crashes of the 737 MAX, and actually kept with the CEO and then finally let him go on a nearly double-figure $1 million settlement, because they didn't want to criticize him, they didn't want to challenge him.
Yeah.
Whereas in the
Or
UK,
even a more recent example, Seamus, of just the Tesla and Elon Musk's pay package. You know, the board has voted to approve it, but you know, shareholders are literally suing to reject that pay package because they don't think it makes sense. So,
yeah, how much is that worth? Something like 53 billion or something like that.
yeah, something in the billions, which is
Yeah, so that's a very, very good example. And that case study is 48 hours, 96 hours old, which is of the board swinging behind Musk, and then also allowing Tesla to delist from Delaware and go and list in, is it in Texas, I think it is, or Arizona, one of the two. That's a fantastic example. Yeah, thank you very much for that. So I'm just conscious of time, and we're coming towards the end. Darren in the background, I don't know if, Darren, if you were able to launch the poll again about what are the most important drivers of high quality decision making. If the poll comes up, then I know that we can, and if it doesn't come up, I know that we can't. But there you go. Thank you very much, Darren. In the background. So very quickly, could you mark those two again? Which two do you think are the most important? I'm just slightly interested to see whether we might put issues around behaviours in the room, psychological safety, and that feature of that concept in decision making a bit more highly focused and more pronounced in terms of the way you would now rate 2 out of those 4, albeit that we have said that all 4 are interdependent and are important. So if you could just very quickly finish that one off, and then we'll begin to draw this to a close. So thank you very much. So that is really gratifying as well as interesting, that actually behaviours and the psychological safe space has become actually the more significant issue for people on the call. And so thank you very much. That is really good. What we want to take one more poll before we go. So I don't want us to run out of time, and I want us to respect everybody's time. So I just want to, we've only just begun to scratch the surface, and in the masterclass in 2 weeks' time, 2nd of July, 12:30 p.m. to 2, we will very quickly refresh what we've talked about psychological safe space, and we will actually look at the behaviors that we want to see in the room, which are going to create the conditions for allowing high quality decision making to take place. And the URL for the masterclass webinar in 2 weeks' time has been put into the chat box, so feel free to click on that and pass that on to your colleagues and friends as well, so we can have a really good discussion. So thank you very much, Darren, for putting that into the chat box. So we want to launch the poll before we run out of time in terms of how have you found this webinar? And it's an hour goes quickly, 1.5 hour boardroom masterclass will go quickly as well. Could you please give us, this is for onboards information, how would you rate the webinar, and would you like to learn more about how onboard is used by that large number of boards about which Josh spoke in the earlier slides? So, and this is, as I say, for onboard's benefit as well. So hopefully you can very quickly just fill that poll in. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the share, and Josh, hand over back to you, and to say thank you to everybody for my part for the beginning of really good conversation, which I hope that we can continue with on the masterclass.
Yeah, great presentation. Thank you, Seamus, so much for joining us. Thank you, audience members, for joining us as well. We do look forward to having you in the next session as well. And with that, we will wrap it up on time here. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Seamus.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Josh. You can go back to bed now. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody. That's really good. See you at the masterclass, hopefully. Great. Thank you.